hat das Gewicht der Bundesrepublik in Europa und darüber hinaus vermehrt. Und trotzdem brauchte man vor diesem gewachsenen Gewicht der Bundesrepublik keine Sorgen zu haben.
Ankunft in Warschau. Zum ersten Mal besucht ein deutscher Bundeskanzler Polen zur Versöhnung 25 Jahre nach dem Krieg, zur Entspannung im Konflikt der Blöcke. Gewaltverzicht und Anerkennung der Grenzen. Der deutsch-polnische Vertrag eröffnet ein neues Kapitel der Beziehungen. Brandts Ostpolitik will Wandel durch Annäherung.
Vor diesem Deutschland braucht man keine Angst zu haben. Das ist ein anderes Deutschland geworden. Weil ja diese seltsame Geschichte, die selbstständige Ostpolitik, hat das Gewicht der Bundesrepublik in Europa und darüber hinaus vermehrt. Und trotzdem brauchte man vor diesem gewachsenen Gewicht der Bundesrepublik keine Sorgen zu haben.
Besuch am Grabmal des unbekannten Soldaten. Zum ersten Mal gedenkt man gemeinsam der Gefallenen des Krieges, den er entfesselte. Hitler wollte Polen auslöschen, in seinem Wahn vom Lebensraum im Osten. Hier ist der Krieg von Anfang an total und unbarmherzig. Ein Vernichtungskrieg auch gegen die Zivilbevölkerung. Warschau ist das erste Militär. Über 3 Jahrzehnte später will Brandt ein Zeichen setzen. Nie wieder soll es Feindschaft zwischen beiden Völkern geben.
Der Krieg und die Schrecken der Besatzung. Das war in Polen nicht vergessen. Man misstraute den Deutschen noch immer. Brandt wusste das. Und er hat nach einer großen Geste gesucht, einer Geste, die diesen Eindruck verändern sollte.
Brandt besucht das Mahnmal des Warschauer Ghettos. Ein Kranz für die Opfer des Aufstands 1943. Ein Ort, der wie kaum ein anderer für das Schicksal der jüdischen Bevölkerung im Zweiten Weltkrieg steht. Originalaufnahmen aus dem Wartesaal des Todes. Letzte Station vor dem Weg in das Vernichtungslager.
Brandt auf dem Gebiet des Warschauer Ghettos. Und zwar genau auf dem Platz, auf dem sich auch mein Leben und meiner Frau entschieden hat. Da sind wir rausgeführt worden, da wurden wir rausgeführt und wir wussten noch nicht nach links, das heißt zum Umschlagplatz und zur Vergasung, oder nach rechts, dann durften wir noch etwas am Leben bleiben.
In einem Vorhof zur Hölle. Abgeschlossen von der Außenwelt, umgeben von Mauern, vegetieren Hunderttausende auf engstem Raum. Der Tod ist im Ghetto allgegenwärtig, drinnen und draußen.
Die Sidewalks, die Pavements were full.
Auf den Straßen und Bürgersteigen lagen ganze Familien und starben. Sie starben an Hunger, an Kälte und Krankheit.
Wer nicht im Ghetto stirbt, wird deportiert. Treblinka, Majdanek, Auschwitz.
Es hat sich dann auch die Widerstandsbewegung, die sich jetzt formierte, der späten Warschauer Ghetto, sehr darum bemüht, das zu klären, was mit den Menschen geschieht. Und ziemlich bald war es klar, die werden alle dort ermordet.
1943 Aufstand im Ghetto. Mit dem Mut der Verzweiflung widersetzen sich die wenigen noch Lebenden dem Terror ihrer Peiniger. Am Ende bricht die SS den aussichtslosen Widerstand. Das Ghetto von Warschau wird ausgelöscht.
Das war etwas so aus allem übrigen schrecklichen Rahmen nochmal herausfand, dass ich fand, ich konnte dann letztlich nicht anderes tun, als ein Zeichen zu setzen. Ich bitte als einer, der nicht zu den wildesten Anhängern Hitlers gehört hat, um es mal so zu sagen, ich bitte für mein Volk um Verzeihung, bete auch darum, dass man uns verzeihen möge.
Der Weg zu einer historischen Geste.
Als er nach vorne gegangen ist, hat er das noch nicht gewusst. Und dieses hat jeder gefühlt, der das gesehen hat.
Und im Näherkommen registrierten wir es, wurde plötzlich mucksmäuschenstill.
Das werde ich nie vergessen. Das werde ich Ihnen nie vergessen. Das hat auch in meinem Leben eine große Rolle gespielt. Vielleicht habe ich erst in diesem Augenblick ganz gewusst, dass es doch richtig war, als ich im Jahre 58 Polen verlassen habe, mich für die Bundesrepublik Deutschland zu entscheiden.
In der Heimat findet Brandt nicht nur Zustimmung für die Politik der Versöhnung. Ohne Not habe er die Grenzen im Osten anerkannt, deutsche Interessen preisgegeben, einem kommunistischen Regime gehuldigt.
Die Geste von Brandt fand ich damals, auch wenn das jetzt hart klingt, als zu unterwürfig.
In den Augen der Welt hat der Kanzler dem Frieden gedient. 1971 erhält er den Nobelpreis.
Brandts Geste war ein Wendepunkt in der Geschichte. In Deutschland hatte sich etwas verändert. Man konnte zu den Deutschen wieder Vertrauen haben. Brandts Kniefall geschah im Namen des deutschen Volkes. Das war eine große Tat.
Der Kniefall von Warschau. Eine Geste, die wohl mehr bewegt hat als Verträge. Ein Symbolbild des Jahrhunderts.
Tauwetter auch im deutsch-polnischen Verhältnis. Am 6. Dezember trifft Willy Brandt in Warschau ein. Jahrzehntelang galt die Bundesrepublik für das kommunistisch regierte Polen als Brutstätte des Terror. Angesichts der Millionen Nazi-Opfer in Polen ein schwerer Gang. Unerwartet sinkt Brandt während der Zeremonie auf die Knie. Der Kniefall von Warschau. Das Bild geht um die Welt. War es eine spontane Geste oder vorher geplant? Hans-Jakob Stehle ist sich sicher.
Ich stand zufällig ganz daneben und es war eine Überraschung, denn es war ein spontaner Gefühlsausbruch von Willy Brandt, als er vor diesem Denkmal stand, das an die Opfer des jüdischen Ghettos in Warschau erinnerte, denn das hat...
Unerwartet sinkt Brandt während der Zeremonie auf die Knie. Der Kniefall von Warschau. Das Bild geht um die Welt. War es eine spontane Geste oder vorher geplant? Hans-Jakob Stehle ist sich sicher.
Hi, everyone. So I'm showing you some clips on YouTube of Federal Republic of Germany's Chancellor, Prime Minister Willy Brandt in 1970, what we used to call West Germany, kneeling down in front of the monument to the ghetto, Warsaw Ghetto, Jewish uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto during World War II in 1944, when the Jews in Nazi Germany occupied Poland had been forced to move into one particular area of the city of Warsaw, and then progressively starved and humiliated, and eventually they knew that they were going to be killed eventually, so they rose up against the German occupiers in 1944 and were utterly crushed, of course. And in 1970, Willy Brandt was the prime minister of Western Germany, and he, as part of his what's called in German Ostpolitik, or to translate into English, East politics, he sought to convince or persuade the Polish regime, a communist regime in 1970, of course, and the other communist regimes in Eastern Europe, that Germany was not a threat, that Germany was not a danger to those countries, and that created conditions, I would argue, created conditions that created the environment, the political environment, political context that really made détente and the easing of tensions between East Europe and West Europe feasible. And I think any explanation as to why the Cold War ended and the Berlin Wall dividing Berlin into two halves, into the East half, into the West half, and Germany between Eastern Germany and Western Germany, why that ended in 1989, that explanation of why the Cold War ended has to include this episode, whereby the German government in West Germany successfully persuaded the governments of Eastern Europe, the communist governments of Eastern Europe that had been put in power by the Soviet Union, and also convinced the Soviet leadership in Moscow, the Soviet Union's leadership, that Germany was not a threat, Germany is not a danger, and this is critical for understanding the role of the European Union as a peace strategy, This, of course, I'm showing you Willy Brandt surprising everybody by falling on his knees to this monument to the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. That's, of course, what Hatoyama, the former prime minister of Japan, was emulating when he fell on his knees and begged for apology as former prime minister, not the actual prime minister of Japan, in China and Seoul. He's purposely copying Willy Brandt's public display, and the reason, one of the reasons why, critical reasons why, Moscow government under Mikhail Gorbachev, who was president of the Soviet Union in the late 1980s until the disintegration of the Soviet Union in 1991. He's still alive. He's 90 years old, of course. The Soviet government did not see Germany as a threat. One of the critical reasons why the communist regimes of Eastern Europe did not see Western Germany as a threat was because it was integrated into the European Union, or what we call the European Union today. Of course, the European Union officially began in 1993. The Treaty of Maastricht, signed in Maastricht in the Netherlands, the city of Maastricht, the Treaty of Maastricht, formally declared the European Union, building upon what had previously been the European Economic Community. But European integration and rebuilding Western Germany within the context of European integration, within the context of the European integrating system that began integrating, in the late 1940s, served to help persuade the French, as well as the communist regimes in Eastern Europe, that Germany was a different country than what it had been, obviously, in the 1930s, up until the rise of Hitler and the end of World War II in 1945. That Germany was not a threat, that Germany was not an imperialist dangerous, conquering power, neither militarily or even economically. The German economy, economic power is not being used by the German government to subtly control and dominate France and Italy and the other countries in the European Economic Community. The construction of the European, what we call today the European Union, is critically important for understanding Germany's political system, and also why we see that Germany and German economic power is not generally perceived as overriding source of threat or danger for countries that suffered so much under Germany up until 1945. And the European integration, the European Union, it has to be part of any explanation as to why, for example, the biggest investor by far in Poland, Willy Brandt is there kneeling before the Warsaw Monument in Poland. The biggest investor, economic investor by far in Poland are German companies. German companies, German investment has transformed the Polish economy. But just reading the American news media, I never encounter reports in the New York Times or other sources about Polish concern that the Germans are going to use their great economic power to buy up and take control of Poland through economic power. I don't read that. In other words, Polish people, Polish public, at least the elite public, the people that pay attention to current events, believe that the European Union prevents the German government from using German economic resources to dominate politically and control politically other countries for Germany's own benefit. They believe that the European Union prevents that from happening, does not allow that to happen. And that's quite an achievement. That is really an achievement in terms of as a peace strategy for Europe. Because the German economy is about 1/3, I think about 1/3 of the economy of the entire European Union. The foundation of the euro is German fiscal policy, monetary policy, The policy of its strong currency and the strong economy of Germany is the keystone, the foundation of the euro. And so we talked about euro bonds being sold by the European Union to recover from the pandemic. And this began in June, just a couple months ago. And the willingness of investors around the world to buy those bonds because as a safe, secure investment because of the important role, a critical role that Germany plays in the Eurozone. Okay. So, I just wanted to make sure that when we described in the previous class about Hatoyama was going around and kneeling down, why was he doing that? Well, of course, I just wanted to highlight that he was copying the Willy Brandt's exercise. But of course, Willy Brandt was the prime minister of Western Germany at the time. Hatoyama was not the prime minister of Japan when he was doing all of these things. He was a former prime minister of Japan. If we want to unify Korea, reunify North and South Korea, what can we learn from the European experience to make that reunification feasible of North and South Korea? And convincing the Chinese that South Korea, Japan, South Korea is not a threat to Chinese interests. That South Korea, if it were to unify with North Korea, that a reunified Korea is not going to be a bigger version of South Korea with American domination of the foreign policy of South Korea. That has to be addressed. The Chinese have to be convinced that a reunified Korea is not a danger to China. And that means, what is the relationship of Korea to Japan and the United States? And in the perception of the Chinese authorities, before they would agree that they no longer want to spend the resources to support and upkeep that regime in North Korea, because one can make the argument that North Korea regime stays in power because the Chinese want to keep it in power. And the Chinese subsidize the North Korean regime because they see, even though those economic resources are costly, they see it's necessary for their own Chinese national security, because they do not want currently a reunified Korean peninsula to be under domination by the United States in regards to Korea's foreign policy. So, but again, I'm talking about these issues because we want to try to highlight how the European Union peace strategy, what can we learn from the European Union for peace in East Asia? And of course, Korean politicians typically borrow this kind of language. For example, under Park Geun-hye, right, there was discussion of Nordpolitik, that South Korea would adopt a North politics towards North Korea, although they really were not very active in that regard in actually doing that under Park Geun-hye. But Nordpolitik, of course, brings to mind the Ostpolitik of Willy Brandt, Ostpolitik. So there's all of these comparisons and analogies, historical analogies from the European experience that are being borrowed to try to formulate ideas and plans for bringing peace to the Korean Peninsula. Okay, so before I forget, because I will forget, we need to go to the attendance. And so let me go to Cyber Campus. And I think I'm still logged in here. Policymaking in the European Union, I'm still logged in. And attendance. And let me make sure that I am sharing the screen with you. And share screen. And here we go here. And there you see, so add and smart attendance. And your number is 505. 505 is your smart attendance number. So let me go back to the chat. Cancel. So let me go back to the screen. 505. And so we go to chat. 505, and that's the attendance number. Okay, so all right, so let's continue on here. And today is our 2-hour class. Someone asked if we are going to also have a 100% online classes next week. That depends on the Korean government. So the Korean government has declared that we are now in stage 4 social distancing rules and regulations. So just to share screen there, let me go back to that, just to show you the screen. If you haven't been there to the site, those of you who are new to Korea might want to look at it. But we go to share screen, and you can see here is the English language Korean site. And so we're on level 4 for Greater Seoul area until Sunday. So on Sunday, the Korean government will inform us as to whether or not we stay at level 4. If we stay at level 4, we have to have 100% online meetings only. If they reduce the level, then we can go back to a hybrid. But in other words, we'll know on Sunday whether or not we're going to continue to meet just online like this. Okay, so let's continue here and go back to, let me see, I want to open up a, make sure I go to the right screen, get to the right folder, and we open this up, and the lesson plan here, and stop share, and let me share the screen again, and here we go. Okay, so well, I want to highlight something that I heard on the news this morning to keep us excited about the material that we're covering in the class, and that is current events and current affairs that are relevant, obviously very much relevant to European Union and the existence and development of the European Union. because we all know about Brexit, right? We all know about the British departure from the European Union. And of course, if one believes that the European Union is such a great, wonderful development, then why did it break apart? Why did Britain leave, I should say? Why did Britain leave the European Union in the British exit of the European Union? And so this is the Wikipedia site for the story of Brexit. And of course, the referendum in 2016 that the British had on whether or not to stay in the European Union, that's not the first referendum that the British had on whether or not to stay within the European Union or European Economic Community, as it was called, way back in 1975, when they had another referendum on whether or not to stay. And that referendum did not cause Britain to leave the European Union. So why did British people vote 52% to 48% to leave the European Union in the 2016 referendum? And there's more than one cause for the way the British voters voted in that election. There's more than one motivation why different people voted for leaving the European Union. There's more than one cause for why they left the European Union. But certainly one of the major issues was immigration. And there has been a great move of people into Great Britain from other parts of the European Union, but also from other parts of the world, like India and the former British colonies in the British Empire. But after countries like Poland and Bulgaria and Romania joined the European Union in 2004 and 2007, there was hundreds of thousands, at least 1 million people moved to the United Kingdom after communism collapsed and the Eastern European countries came into the European Union in 2004. Poland came in 2004, and Poland is by far the largest country among the former communist countries. And then Bulgaria and Romania joined in 2007. And by some estimates, at least 800,000 just Polish people, maybe up to 1 million Polish people moved to the United Kingdom. I'm not even talking about Romanians and Bulgarians and Czechs and Hungarians and others that may have moved there. Just from Poland, almost up to 1 million Polish people moved. Now they went there, they went to Britain because there was economic opportunities. There were jobs, they found jobs. Britain had a low unemployment rate when it voted to leave the European Union. So those people were coming and they were finding work, typically the kind of work that often that the British people do not like to do, like here in Korea, or the kind of work that Americans don't like to do in the United States: agricultural work, construction work, difficult, dirty, dangerous work, right? The 3 Ds: difficult, dirty, and dangerous jobs. But for many people living in Great Britain, they reacted negatively to the clear evidence of all of these other people coming from other cultures and looking and dressing and looking differently than English people or Scottish people, and speaking other languages amongst each other, having stores sell items that Polish people would like Polish newspapers in Polish language. Many people in Britain, typically those who have more difficult, precarious economic conditions, reacted very negatively to this immigration of people from typically the poorer parts of the European Union into the richer parts, including Great Britain. And keep in mind, another reason why many of these people went to Britain is because as a foreign language, if you're a Polish person, or if you're a Bulgarian person, or you're a Romanian person, if you study a foreign language in school, when you are a child in Poland, or a child in Bulgaria, or a child in Romania, what foreign language are you going to study? You're going to study English. Not everybody studied English, but English is the the global language, right? It's the language of the primary language of globalization. And so, of course, these people often had some basic English skills, or more than basic, like very well-developed English skills, and they could more easily adapt to an English language culture like Great Britain. But for many people, I'm not calling them a racist, I'm not describing them in that in negative way, but they reacted negatively. And still, as we mentioned, they were coming to Britain because the British companies needed them. They needed to hire these people to work, in the farms and in construction and in the tourism industry to take care of hotels and the like. And so those people, those companies that were hiring these international workers to come to Britain didn't want Brexit to happen. Typically, they were opposed to Brexit. But there was a critical event in world affairs far away from Britain that I think had a critical impact on the British, that moved them towards increase the political pressure to have another referendum on whether or not Britain should stay in the European Union. And that big event was the refugee crisis, the European migrant crisis. And I think you can see this, although I'm not certain, because sometimes the screen doesn't really show what it should. But here you see, this is the Wikipedia entry for the European migrant crisis that occurred in 2015. And these migration people were coming primarily, you can see in this chart, most of them were coming from Syria. Here is Syria, which is still divided in a terrible civil war that's killed hundreds of thousands of people and forced millions of people to move, to flee their homes. But from other countries as well. Kosovo, note Afghanistan. This is the third country in 2015, and Albania and Iraq and so on. But you see Afghanistan here. And now, of course, we all know about the collapse of the American allied government in Kabul in Afghanistan. And so there's much discussion about, are we going to see another big movement of people out of Afghanistan this time, even more than in the past, again, trying to get to the rich, prosperous countries of the European Union, relatively speaking, in order to survive and find work so they can take care of themselves and their families. And there's great concern as we meet here about that, because this concern about, and it often was a racist concern, that because Britain was in the European Union, that these migrants coming in from the Middle East for the most part, but also from Africa here, had the right to come to Britain. And they would come to Britain because the British economy was stronger than these other economies in the rest of the European Union. And the British, of course, they also speak English, and these people are often coming from British colonies, like former British colonies, like Iraq used to be part of the British Empire, right? Or sub-Saharan Africa countries where English is spoken. And so, rightly or wrongly, there was this perception that as long as Britain stayed in the European Union, that it was going to be overwhelmed with even more refugees. And so those British political actors who favored Britain leaving the European Union, they continued to emphasize that in the lead up to the British vote, the referendum in 2016, a year later, as to whether or not Britain should stay in the European Union. And an example of that is one of the posters of or images that was advocated by this man, Nigel Farage, right? You see Nigel Farage was one of the leaders of the Brexit movement. And he led the United Kingdom Independence Party that has been pushing for many years for Britain to leave the European Union he had been a member of the European Parliament since 1979, advocating the British leave the European Union. And he entered the European Parliament when the first elections occurred in the European Parliament to enter the European Parliament as a member of the European Parliament to advocate and agitate against the European Union and to advocate Britain leaving the European Union. And this was one of his campaign posters for the Brexit, favoring Britain leaving the European Union. You can see he's pointing at these people, breaking point, that the United Kingdom is reaching the breaking point with all these migrants coming into the European Union. And if you look closely, you can see that none of these people look like they're from, well, these people look like they come from the Middle East, right? They look like they come from Afghanistan, Syria, not whites, not white people, not Polish people, not other Europeans, white Europeans, but from the Middle East. And so people claim that this is racist. That, of course, Nigel Farage denies that he's a racist. He denies that he was appealing to people's fears and racist stereotypes that they have. But when you look at this campaign poster, which was the most famous campaign poster in favor of Brexit, you can see all of these people. None of them, here's somebody that looks Asian, right? East Asian. Like from China or somewhere. Is this racist? Maybe, but it seemed to have worked. And so the reason I'm talking about this referendum that happened 5 years ago was because these issues are now emerging again, now that we see the Afghanistan government has collapsed, and there is great concern that that there's going to be a new movement of people into Europe, refugees fleeing Afghanistan as the Afghanistan economy collapses. I think I have see if I can find it here. The Afghanistan economy collapses. And so I was listening to Democracy Now! This morning. I told you I listened to Democracy Now! In the morning, and they have an interesting story. Well, I was listening to the American radio, I should say, and they had an interesting story on about, let's see if I can find it here. I thought I had it open already. Where did it go? Yeah, here it is. This is, let me see, make sure that you can see this. So we go to share screen. And the reporter this morning, or in today's report on this American public radio station, interviewed this person. She's the, Ylva Johansson is the Home Affairs Commissioner for the European Union. And she is the person that is one of the primary European Union officials responsible for dealing with refugees. And so they're very concerned about this possibility of a vast movement of new refugees coming from Afghanistan, coming to Europe through Iran and then Turkey, the way people came through Turkey from Syria and through Turkey from Iraq, and previously from Afghanistan through Iran and then into Turkey to come to Europe. And you can see she's interviewed here, and the number that she is advocating, she is saying that the European Union is already discussing allocating $600 million to the neighbors of Afghanistan, in Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Pakistan mentioned, probably also to others in that region, to try to accommodate these refugees, to try to keep these refugees there, rather than encourage them or push them to continue on through Iran and into Turkey, and then from Turkey into Greece and the other countries of the European Union. And so, and she said that we haven't decided that it's going to be 600 million. They're still debating this, but you can imagine it's a politically very sensitive topic, right? It's a very sensitive topic because of Brexit, because of nationalism, because of the stereotyping that emerges in France or in Italy about these migrants coming into their country from the Middle East, particularly on the stereotypes regarding Islam and terrorists and Muslims and jihadists, and that if there's another wave of migration into Europe like there was 6 years ago in 2015, that it could lead to a rise of more Eurosceptic parties, further strengthening other parties that are hostile to the European Union in France or in Italy or in Hungary or in Poland, because they are going to blame the European Union. Those politicians will blame the European Union for being responsible for allowing all of these Afghanistan people or other people to be able to come into Hungary or to come into Poland or to come into France, because of the commitment to the European Union to allowing people, once they are allowed to enter the European Union and stay in the European Union, they have the right to move anywhere, because that's the foundation of the single market that the European integration created, right? The European single market allows for the free movement within the European Union of 4 categories of resources: goods, services, capital, and labor. So the argument is made, and I'm not saying it's a valid argument, I'm not saying it's an accurate argument, that if we, Britain, are not in the European Union, we don't have to accept any more migration from anywhere else because we're out of the European Union. But if those migrants come into, from Afghanistan, come into Greece, then we in Germany or in France or in Italy, we have to accept them if they move through from Greece to anywhere else in the European Union, because we're in the European single market. And this is really intense concern in Europe because of the rise of hostile political parties, hostile to the European Union, playing primarily, not only, but primarily with immigration. That accommodating these people coming from the Middle East and Africa, fleeing poverty, fleeing war, even though, as I said, typically you can make an economic argument that these European countries need these migrants. They need these people to work in their economies. But this is not an economics argument. This is people's nationalism. This is people's nationalist identity. This is people's nationalist emotional thinking that perceives threats from people that don't look like me and don't have the same culture as I do, and they don't have the same language, and supposedly Muslims are vulnerable to becoming terrorists. These are all stereotypes, and this might not affect you or me, but it does generate a lot of concern among other people in these countries. Typically, not only, but typically people who have lower levels of education, who also might view themselves as economically in competition with these migrants coming into their countries, because these migrants are perceived as a source of competition for their jobs, for jobs that don't require higher education, that don't require foreign language skills, right? So that's the big concern. And so we'll see if the Afghan economy continues to go into crisis because inflation is beginning. The Americans and the Europeans have frozen the money that the Afghanistan government had in foreign bank accounts, which you need to have that money if you're going to engage in international trade and commerce, because the Americans and the Europeans do not want right now the Taliban government to have control over that. I think it's $9 billion that the Afghan government had in foreign bank accounts. The American government and the European government have frozen that money. So the Afghan government has great difficulty. The Taliban government will have great difficulty engaging in any kind of international trade or legal trade, not to mention encourage investment into their country. If the Americans and others put sanctions, economic sanctions on the Taliban, like they put sanctions on North Korea. And if they do, and the economic conditions continue to get worse and worse and worse, there'll be more and more migration, people fleeing Afghanistan to try to survive. And so what is the European Union going to do? Will the European Union oppose America if America puts sanctions on the Taliban because they think the Taliban is encouraging terrorism? Will the European Union disobey Washington or distance itself from Washington to do business with the Taliban in order to allow the economy to to function in Afghanistan so that people do not have to leave Afghanistan by the hundreds of thousands. That's the big issue, the big question mark that we have today. And it has to be addressed pretty soon because the economic conditions in Afghanistan are getting worse and worse and worse. But we saw what happened. I mean, I think you can make the argument that Brexit would not have passed if the 2015 migrant crisis in Europe had not occurred. And so now we're preparing for another big potential surge of immigration from Asia and the Middle East with the Afghanistan situation. Okay, so again, to show the relevance of our topic to current events, let me see, let me stop that share, and so you can read this. I'll make this available if you're interested. It's an interview with this commissioner. So all right, so let's continue on now, and let me open up. Let's see here. Here's an exercise. Let's do an exercise. So I would like you to please respond, the two of you, the two students in the class, please respond to the following statement. After the COVID-19 pandemic global crisis is over, when we're done with the COVID-19 crisis, the world will remember that the European Union was the leader in vaccinating the world against COVID-19. Do you think, how do you respond to that? Do you strongly agree, or neutral cannot decide, or disagree, or strongly disagree? So again, there's no right or wrong answer to that. I would like you to think about that and as to whether or not you think the European Union is going to be remembered as the leader in leading the world in overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic, not just within their own countries, or not just within the European Union, but around the whole world, as the point is made over and over and over again in the media, right? That to address the pandemic, the entire world has to be vaccinated, because as long as there's the coronavirus is circulating among millions of people, it will continue to evolve and mutate, and we'll get, Delta variant, Lambda variant, Mu variant, new kinds of viruses will evolve and mutate and evolve. And so if the world to address this crisis, for Korea to address it, for the United States to get over the crisis, for Germany to get over the crisis, the whole world has to get over the crisis. But of course, much of the world is poor and doesn't have the technology and doesn't have the resources that, of course, that the Americans and the Europeans have. Do you think that the European Union will be the leader in vaccinating the world, or will it be China or the United States? So let me go to the website for the course, and let's do a survey. And so here you see there is. Let me see, make sure that you can see that. So let's see if I can find so share screen. And so there's the exercise. So before we do the exercise, the two students, let me put you in a breakout room. Can you talk to each other and come up with a decision as to where you try to fit yourself on that scale of 1 to 5, right? So Kang Dong-un Sally and Owen Tech, please join the group that I invited you to join. Please join the group.
Okay.
And Sally? Okay, so where do you fit on this scale? Where do you fit in terms of where do you come to a decision as to where you think the European Union will be? Will it be remembered by the world and Korea and elsewhere as the leader in vaccinating the world, or will that be done by the United States and China, or China? So talk to each other and please try to decide where you are on that scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and explain why, of course. And I will do this exercise as well, because I always try to ask you to do what I would do. So where do I fit on this? Okay, I have my statement. And so are you ready? So let me close all rooms. Let me see the stop share. And we go here and we go close all rooms. Okay, so we have 1 minute to finish. Okay, you're both done. So let's see who's going to speak first. So heads, Dong-un will speak first, Sally will speak first, and tails, Owen Tech will speak first. So let me see, let me flip a coin. And it is Owen Tech will speak first. So Owen Tech, Owen Tech, where do you fit along this scale in terms of where do you think the European Union will play, what role it will play in dealing with the global pandemic?
As I know, the AstraZeneca vaccine company is located in Europe, UK, and the first country in the world to be vaccinated is UK too. But United Kingdom is not belongs to European Union, so I think I cannot I cannot agree with the question.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I mean, AstraZeneca was the first, and the AstraZeneca vaccine was produced by a British university and a Swedish company. So, and Sweden is in the European Union, but this was very controversial. You might remember last year that the British quickly purchased the vaccines from AstraZeneca, and the European Union appeared to be relatively slow under the European Commissioner. Ursula von der Leyen is the president of the European Commission, the German political figure who was the former defense minister of West Germany. Ursula von der Leyen was criticized because Europe was relatively slow in placing, compared to Britain, in placing orders for the vaccine, and so AstraZeneca was the first vaccine that was approved, while the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine that was developed by the German company, BioNTech, in agreement with the American company Pfizer to manufacture, that came a little bit later. But and I think you might remember in early 2020 there was a great deal of stress and anxiety around the whole world about the virus and the vaccine, and these productions of these vaccines, like so much of the production of anything of high value in the world, involves many different actors across a number of different countries with different factories located in different places around the world. So the production of these vaccines from start to finish involves different factories in different countries around the world, including factories that AstraZeneca had in Europe. But because Britain signed the purchase agreements with AstraZeneca first, before the European Union could sign the purchase agreement, Britain got access to all of the AstraZeneca vaccines, and Europe, weeks later, much later, got access to the AstraZeneca vaccine. And there was lots of criticism about, well, of course, all sorts of comparison between how quickly and fast the Boris Johnson government of the United Kingdom moved to purchase the vaccines compared to the slow effort of the European Union. And of course, the European Union, how many countries are in the European Union? 27, right? So for Ursula von der Leyen and the Commission, they had to communicate with 27 different member states, 27 different countries, to come to an agreement, a consensus about how to go about acquiring the vaccine and distributing it. They had to talk to all of those individual countries. And yes, so it was slow. And of course, everybody remembers Brexit was just 4 years previously. And Boris Johnson, the leader of one of the leaders of the Brexit effort, and now the Prime Minister of Britain, was saying, see, we were right. Look how much more quickly we acted, because we were not tied down by this big European system with so many different countries that all had to be consulted, and they all had to have their input, and we had to discuss and debate. And no, we just acted quickly in this wartime equivalent scenario, and we were able to get the vaccine and get the vaccinated more quickly. And so yes, Brexit was good, and Ursula von der Leyen was in a crisis, and there was a political crisis. Is Boris Johnson correct? Is he right? Later, of course, the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine would be approved. I think just a month later, it would be finally approved. At least it was approved in the United States. And then there was some concern about the AstraZeneca vaccine that is considered to be an British Oxford University vaccine. But as I said, it was developed partly with European Union companies in Sweden. And there was some concern that the AstraZeneca vaccine might cause some blood clotting problems. It might have some blood problems that were very rare, very, very rare. But of course, if you're inoculating tens or hundreds of millions of people, I mean, you're going to find that if only 1 in a million people have a bad reaction, that's still going to generate hundreds of people that are millions, hundreds of people that are going to develop this blood clot problem that can seriously hurt or even kill people, even if it's only 1 in a million event. And then but the Europeans, including the Prime Minister of Germany, Angela Merkel, said, well, we don't really want the AstraZeneca vaccine anyway because it's got this problem. And of course, we all know that BioNTech is a German company. And BioNTech, by the way, was set up by Turkish people, Turkish immigrants from Turkey to Germany. They're scientists who came from Turkey and settled in Germany, from the Middle East. And so that appeals to the European Union image of being, being more cosmopolitan, less nationalistic, and so before I go on here, let's talk to Sally. Sally, what did you have to say?
In my opinion,
yeah,
I think I disagree because the South Korean government has asked the US for help in distributing vaccines. So the President Moon visited in the US in person and returned from a vaccine contract. And Japan also visited the US in person and tried to get the vaccine. So yeah, so I think after pandemic, the US is still in leader in vaccinating the world against COVID-19. And Pfizer and Moderna is the most used vaccine in the world. So I think US is the leader.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I remember when the pandemic started back in March in 2020, where it was declared in February in 2020, but the US went into lockdown in March. And on that show, Democracy Now! That I was referencing earlier, or the American Public Radio, they interviewed an expert. I think her name was, well, I have to check what her name is, but a medical journalist who writes on science and journalism. And she said in that interview that this global pandemic crisis will last 36 months, 3 years, 36 months. So we're at most halfway through this issue, this problem, right? Because again, the virus is continuing to circulate, so it's going to continue to mutate. So, in terms of, in places in Africa, I think only like maybe 1 or 2% of the population of Africa, which is about equal to the size of China, maybe 1 or 2% of the people there have gotten fully vaccinated. Even in India, only like 10 or 11% of the population is fully vaccinated, I think I read yesterday. And in Southeast Asia, like in Myanmar, Indonesia, again, it's more than 10%, I think, but not much more. And so we have a long way to go on this. But I just wanted to, I wanted to highlight this news report that came out yesterday in the New York Times, which is, my favorite newspaper. By the way, I get a sense so much of American journalism, including on the radio and in other news sources, like the radio report I just showed you that has the website about the European Union Commissioner for Home Affairs talking about money for the neighbors of Afghanistan. They read the New York Times, these journalists in the United States, and that is their agenda for their own research and own investigative journalism and their own reports that they then produce. It happens again and again and again. It's like I read the New York Times every day, and it seems like the New York Times is like the agenda setter for all of the other sophisticated media in the United States. Even that Democracy Now!, which I'll show you in a bit here. Well, no, I won't. I'll show that in the other class. But it says here from yesterday, after a fumbling start, and I try to describe, that the European Union overtook the United States in vaccinations last month. Around 70% of adults in the European Union have been fully vaccinated against the coronavirus, EU officials said on Tuesday, a milestone that puts the bloc among the world's leaders in vaccinations despite a sluggish start earlier this year and worrying discrepancies among the member states. Fumbling means like in football, you lose the football. After a fumbling start, the European Union overtook the United States in vaccination last month, with campaigns taken together across the bloc's 27 countries grew at a faster pace than anywhere else in the world. Tuesday's announcement marked the meeting of a self-set deadline that once seemed far out of reach. This topic relates to this topic of vaccine nationalism, right? Vaccine nationalism. Who is the best at addressing the coronavirus pandemic? Who is the best at producing vaccines? Who is the best at getting vaccinated? And who is the best in helping the rest of the world and saving the global economy? China, India, United States, European Union, who, right? They go on here. While the vaccination rate has slowed this month, it is yet to reach a ceiling that some experts and officials feared it would hit over the summer. Taking children and teenagers into account, more than 55% of the overall EU population has been fully vaccinated, compared with 52% in the US, 61% in Israel, and 64% in Britain. So Britain is still higher, right? But of course, there's always these comparisons between the European Union and the United States. The United States likes to, and many observers like to claim the United States is the only world superpower. And the European Union, is the European Union going to be a superpower? Is it a superpower? What does it mean to be a superpower? What does that mean? Even the United States, the world's only superpower, just was defeated in Afghanistan. This country of 39 million people, I think 34, 35, 39 million, one of the poorest places in the world. Afghanistan has the highest mortality rate, death rate for children and mothers after childbirth of anywhere in the world, #1. And they defeated the mighty United States, the superpower, with all of its money and all of its technology. So what does it mean to be a superpower in this kind of world that we live in 2021? And so there's always these comparisons between the United States and the European Union. And could the European Union become the United States of Europe, the way the United States became the United States of America? Those figures, however, mask wide differences between the EU countries, ones that authorities in Brussels may struggle to address because each member country runs its own vaccination campaign. So the vaccination campaign within the European Union is still run by the nations, the individual member states, even though the effort to sign purchase agreements, contracts for purchase of the vaccines was done through the European Commission. All right, the European Commission signed the purchase contracts with Pfizer and tried to with AstraZeneca. Okay, then they bought the vaccines and they distributed them to Bulgaria, Greece, France, Italy, and then those countries, the member states, then were responsible for administering the vaccines. Well, more than 80% of adults have been fully inoculated in Belgium, Denmark, and Portugal, and more than 75% in countries like Spain and Netherlands. The figure falls to 45% in Latvia, a former communist country, 31% in Romania, a former communist country, and 20% in Bulgaria. Where, by the way, I spent 15 years working and teaching in Bulgaria before I came here. And and the article describes how different countries have done different things, like France and Italy, like South Korea, are requiring COVID passes to dine. Well, I don't know about South Korea. I just know that when I enter the Catholic University of Korea building, I have to show a QR code from my Kakao account to enter the building. But France and Italy have implemented strong incentives for people to get vaccinated. They're requiring COVID passes to dine in restaurants and access cultural venues. But then there's the problem in the former communist countries that have problems with corruption and distrust of the government because they think the government officials are corrupt. And so they don't trust the government officials to say the truth and tell them the truth and to trust what they recommend because they think that they're only interested in making money for themselves. But there's another story in Eastern Europe, countries that could threaten the bloc's handling of the pandemic in the fall and winter. In Bulgaria, disinformation about the virus, poor trust in institutions, and a lack of communication strategy to counter vaccine hesitancy have plagued vaccination efforts, including among older people. Yeah, I was listening to that same radio podcast of the world I showed you earlier, and they interviewed people and leaders in Romania as to what went wrong in Romania. And they said in that news report, just from a couple of days ago, I could probably find it here, that the Romanian government let the Romanian army take leadership in the vaccination campaign in Romania, the army. And people don't pay attention to the army when the army has public service broadcasts. The army doesn't know how to do these things. The army doesn't know how to communicate effectively. And the church, the Christian church in Romania, was not consulted or was not brought in to persuade people, because still about a third of the population of Romania lives in the countryside, and the churches and the priests in the Romanian Orthodox Church are very influential, and they were not persuaded, they were not approached, they were not brought in to try to persuade people in these villages and towns to get the vaccine. And in some of these priests, like in the United States, some of these Christian ministers reject the vaccine. We don't need the vaccine, we only need to pray. Romania, despite the low vaccination rate, has sold doses to another country, Ireland, to avoid wasting them, and donated others to neighboring countries. And I think there was some talk, wasn't South Korea going to buy some doses from Romania? Sally or Untek? I think I saw something on the headlines in the news that the South Korean government was even going to try to buy some of these extra doses from Romania.
Yeah.
Yeah. So on Tuesday, Ms. von der Leyen said that the European Union, she's the president of the European Commission, right? Said the European Union need to help the rest of the world vaccinate, but vaccine diplomacy efforts have so far proved limited because of a lack of coordinated approach from the bloc's 27 countries to sell or donate doses. So South Korea doesn't go to the European Commission. South Korea doesn't go to Ursula von der Leyen. They have to go to the Romanian government or the Bulgarian government and say, do you have any extra vaccines we can buy? Many countries in the European Union's immediate neighborhood, such as Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Tunisia, are in need of doses and have among the world's highest death tolls by size of population. Right next to the European Union, North Macedonia is on the border with Greece, right? Montenegro has a border with Croatia. Kosovo wants to join the European Union as well. And they have among the highest death tolls. And so we have a crisis, and that's a theme when you study the European Union, that the European Union, and this is something that the European Union leaders themselves over the years have stated, the European Union develops and evolves in responding to crises, that there's a crisis that threatens the European Union, that threatens the member states, and the member states or the countries of Europe can try to solve or address the crisis on their own, just saying, we're doing whatever we want to do. We're not going to talk to other countries. We're going to act the way, for example, the British acted, or they respond to the crisis, whether it be the coronavirus or the pandemic economic recession, or earlier the Greek debt crisis in 2010, 2012, they respond with more cooperation, more integration. And you saw that in our last class when we described how in the last class. Let me see if I can go back to those reports about how the European Union is now developing Eurobonds, to sell on the financial markets. And let's see if I can find, because I have a lot of different items here that I want to show you, right? And yeah, so here, yeah, this is a new report, and I'll just close that and open up this screen here. So is that it? A second, let me find it, because I have a lot of files open, and so the computer gets confused. And I'm trying to open up that one file. So let me see here, just a second. Let me open up that file one more time. And let me just put that, and that, that, and just a second. Trying to open up, and I'm trying not to close by accident any files that I don't want to close here. So Let me open up that. Oh, okay. So here I found it. Yeah. So as I told you, the book that we're using was finished last year in the spring before this latest announcement about the European Union moving into buying and selling Euro bonds for sale for investors to buy on the international financial markets. And it's ironic because in the book, there's, as I mentioned, I think last class, there's some discussion about how the European Union cannot yet issue Euro bonds. Now it can, because of responding to the coronavirus crisis pandemic. Right? And so this is a different report than the one I showed you last class. It's a little more detail. Like the book doesn't mention, the textbook doesn't mention next generation European Union because this was approved in the spring of last year, right? And it states that the European Union will raise more than 800 billion euros over 5 years, transforming it into one of the world's biggest bond issuers. It says everything changed last April at a summit to put together a pandemic stimulus plan. When the people in the funding team were asked how far they might expand the program, they thought that they, at a push, they might raise a maximum of 80 billion euros a year in the markets. But when the summit ended, they were told they would need to raise double that. We were crossing the Rubicon. That's a slang term, an expression meaning this is a crisis. What we were doing previously was very plain vanilla stuff, just selling a few bonds, not much. And suddenly it was a very different ball game. It was just a question of throwing overboard everything we've done before and starting to say, okay, if we're going to do this, this is completely different. How do we do it? How do we build a machine that's going to do it? To sell hundreds of billions of euros worth of bonds. The team, a European Union team, spent the first few months figuring out what resources it would need and bringing the right people in to build a new, bigger funding body. So some kind of organization that's going to sell these Euro bonds, a European Union organization. It seconded individuals from the bloc's other big funding vehicle, the European Stability Mechanism, which emerged during the Greek crisis, sovereign debt crisis 12 years ago. Again, the European Stability Mechanism, and it's mentioned in the book, was created to deal with the Greek crisis in response to the Greek sovereign debt crisis, when Greece had to receive 300 billion euros from the rest of the European Union, mostly Germany, to be able to pay its debts and not default on its loans and stay in the Eurozone. Remember the last class we had an exercise? If a country joins the Eurozone, it means it's never going to leave the European Union. Yes or no? Do you agree or strongly agree or disagree? And this experience with dealing with Ireland, these crisis era loans, mainly to Greece, Ireland, Portugal, Cyprus, and Spain, but particularly Greece, right? At that time, saw the European Union demonstrating to the whole world that the euro is permanent. And we know because the person that was the president of the European Central Bank at the time is the person that's now the Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi. He was the president of the European Central Bank 10 years ago. And Mario Draghi said, we will do, he announced as the leader of the European Central Bank, that we will do whatever is necessary to keep Greece in the Eurozone. In other words, we, the European Central Bank, will use our ability to print money, to make money, to buy Greek bonds so that the Greek government can continue to borrow money to fund its government, despite the fact that the Greek government was in crisis and had a bad reputation because of its weaknesses in its government and its tremendous debt that it hid and only revealed when the international financial community became skeptical and said, Greece is lying about its economic, financial, monetary situation. So the European Union came in and took over the responsibility for Greek debts. And Mario Draghi declared that basically once a country's in the Eurozone, the European Central Bank will simply print its own money, euros, to buy that country's bonds that it wants to sell at a reasonable price. And I remember the news reports at the time. I could find it if you can look it up on Google. They called it Mario Draghi's big bazooka. You know, a bazooka, a gun that you used to fire from your shoulder to destroy a tank, a bazooka. When Mario Draghi said the European Central Bank will print money in order to buy bonds, that was a significant major step in making the Eurozone and the euro be seen as permanent. And today we see the European Union is selling tens of billions of euro bonds every month on international financial markets for investors to buy at low interest rates, building upon the previous developments on the previous crisis. So, and so this is a debt management office. So the European Union needs to have a debt management office, just like South Korea has one, Germany, the United States has one, a debt management office. And they had to build a debt management office, and they built it within the European Commission. So the European Commission is developing and evolving and developing the ability to sell bonds and monitor them and so on. And they look to their member states, their debt management offices of Germany, France, in terms of how to set this up at a European level. And the team has had something of a dress rehearsal for Next Generation EU with the SURE, support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency program. Since the first SURE deal in October, the funding team has raised 90 billion euros through 7 transactions, allowing it to test its processes, create a liquid secondary curve, and establish itself as a large and frequent issuer. In other words, 7 transactions. When they announced to the thousands or millions of investors, who wants to buy this group of Eurobonds? But Next Generation EU will be markedly different, not least because issuance volumes will almost double. All of the SURE transactions have been syndicated by banks. So they sold the bonds under the SURE program at support to mitigate unemployment risks in an emergency. That was sold, those bonds were sold to banks. And strict conditions were placed on maturities and size. In other words, how big they are, what kind of interest rates they can offer for the investors. And while syndication will remain an important component in funding with one deal every month plan, the team has also put up together an auction platform that should be up and running from this month, September. So we're going to start auctioning bonds just the same way South Korea does, United States, Germany, Britain, all countries do. Indeed, the creation of an auction facility has been the single biggest piece of work for the team. While auctions are a cheaper way to sell debt than bank syndication, they require more setup work. To save time and avoid lengthy private procurement processes, the team has instead sought help from public sector institutions such as the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi's organization when he was president. So there you see the Euro bonds that have been issued. So they started selling some in 2015, in 2016, none in 2017, and then a little bit in 2018. The Americans borrow. I think what the Americans sell, they sold on international bond markets, treasury bonds from U.S. government, $1,000 billion last year, $1 trillion worth of bonds they sold. So 5 billion euros, if that's about 5, that's not even 5 billion. That's 3 or 4 or 5 billion euros is nothing. Now they're up to I should say that's a month actually. Now they're up to issuing 50 billion euros a month, and they're planning to issue up to 140 billion euros a month in bond sales. Are we seeing a United States of Europe emerge here? Just over 720 billion euros of money raised over the next 5 years will fund the European Union's post-pandemic recovery and resilience facility. 55% of that will be loans that the member states of the European Union will pay back to the European Commission. The rest, as well as a further 80 billion via other programs, will be grants to be paid back by the Commission through budget increases and new carbon and digital taxes. But it's paying back the European Commission with Euro money. So it's all internal. Once the auction is up and running in September, the team will, on top of managing monthly issuance, turn to the final pieces needed to make the Commission a fully optional debt management organization. Swaps facilities could be added to allow it to fix the rate at which it lends money to member states. Futures contracts may also allow to help liquidity. And for now, there appears to be no shortage of demand for bonds. So people want to buy those bonds. The first sure deal attracted more than $233 billion of orders for the 17 billion euros of bonds on sale. Central banks, including the European Central Bank, continue to hoover up bonds to support the economy. And indeed, about a fifth of sure bonds went to such institutions. But fund managers and banks were even bigger buyers. So they don't view this as a risky investment. The euro exists. Does that mean the European Union exists? Well, of course it exists, but does it really exist? When you had Britain leave the European Union? Remember, South Korea, United States, China, Catholic University of Korea, they only exist up here. Germany, European Union, China, Russia, they only exist in our brains. How much confidence do we have in these abstract notions that they are real actors in the world with real power, and we have to pay attention to them? Well, the people buying these euro bonds believe that this is a real economic actor, this European Union, at least the Eurozone is, that's a real actor. And we can invest in that and make money. Yeah, that's a big theoretical perspective in studying European Union, constructivism. How do you construct the belief in the minds of the world's population that the European Union exists, not to mention the European Union's population? And the European Union is real, and the European Union is powerful, and the European Union is good. How do you construct that up here? Okay, and see, let's stop the share. Let me go back. I had another exercise, so let me see if I can go back to the vote here. And so what's the other exercise that I have here? Oh, yeah, so can you go ahead and vote? Please vote on this issue. Let me see if I can go back to the square share screen. So please vote, the two of you, as to where, after all this discussion, whether or not you think that after the COVID-19 pandemic crisis is over, the world will remember that the European Union was the leader in vaccinating the world against COVID-19. So please vote. And I have to refresh that. And so, and the winner is disagree. Okay, well, we'll see. We'll see who's going to vaccinate Africa. Who's going to vaccinate the Middle East? They're a lot closer to Europe than they are to the United States. And those migrants are coming from Africa and the Middle East, right? And the COVID-19 pandemic is causing additional horrible problems along with war in Afghanistan and other fighting in Syria. So we'll watch. This is a fascinating time to be alive, to watch this kind of these kinds of developments. Okay, and so please also respond to this. The European Union is a superpower. Do you strongly agree, agree, neutral, cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree? That was left over from the last class, I think. Remember, the mighty superpower of the United States has just been humiliated in Afghanistan. One more vote.
I think the vote is done. The time is
Oh, yeah?
limited.
Oh, you're right. Yeah. I forgot to, well, let me edit that and fix that. Okay. Thank you. I should have fixed that. So let's do that 1050 here and save. Okay. So go ahead and vote. Agree and strongly agree. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, we'll have a test of that. And you know, the critical, I think the critical test is the relationship of the European Union to the United States, because this leads into next week's readings, right? The history of the European Union. And the European Union began in the late 1940s, early 1950s, under the beginning first efforts to integrate Europe to try to prevent World War III. And the 1940s, late 1940s, the Cold War, the conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union was intensifying. And the Korean War, as you know, began in 1950, and the Americans were convinced that Kim Il-sung of North Korea was a puppet of Joseph Stalin, and that this was the beginning of Joseph Stalin's use of his puppets and allies to conquer the world for communism ruled through from Moscow in the Soviet Union. Rightly or wrongly, I'm not saying that's correct, but that became the dominant view in the US. And it was in that context, within that global political, international systemic situation, that the European integration, economic integration began. The European Coal and Steel Community was officially launched in 1952, a year before Stalin died, while the Korean War was still going on. NATO was announced during the Korean War. So the European Union grew and developed for the first 30 years, 35, almost 40 years of its existence during the Cold War, from early 1950s until the Soviet Union collapsed in at the end of 1991. So for almost 40 years, 2 generations, the European Union, what became the European Union, grew and developed, while the Americans had tens of thousands of soldiers in Western Europe, when the Soviet Union had hundreds of thousands of soldiers in Eastern Germany ready to fight the Americans and their allies in Western Europe, when there were nuclear weapons pointed at each other in Germany, between Western Germany and Eastern Germany, controlled by the Soviet Union and the United States, when the Americans continued to believe that the Soviet Union was trying to do what Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany tried and failed to do: conquer the world. And the Americans encouraged European integration in the early 1950s, or late 1940s, early 1950s, because of a number of reasons, but the number one reason was because the Americans wanted the Europeans to be able to help them contain the Soviet Union, contain what the Americans believed was basically a Russian version of Hitler's Germany, this time led by Stalin in the Soviet Union. After the Soviet Union had already conquered Poland and Czechoslovakia, well, Czechoslovakia later, Bulgaria, Romania, had the Soviet army there, dominating these countries, installing communist regimes in these countries. And again, the Americans believed that Stalin told Kim Il-sung to attack South Korea, that Stalin is responsible for Mao Zedong and the communists taking power in China and then in North Korea. So the European Union grew up under the shadow of the United States as the ally of the United States, as the close ally of the United States for 40 years. Then in 1992, the Soviet Union was gone. And so many people were so happy that the Soviet Union, the Cold War was over. And then we had new conflicts begin already in Iraq, when Saddam Hussein of Iraq ordered his army to unify the Arab world under his presidency dictatorship as the future unifier of the Arabs under his dictatorship, like Otto von Bismarck unified the Germans, and Kim Il-sung tried to unify the Koreans in the 1950s. And Otto von Bismarck succeeded, however, in the 1870s in Europe. But the United States opposed Saddam Hussein, and we had the Persian Gulf War and the beginning of the destruction of Iraq, and then later Syria, these countries that were created after World War I out of the British and French empires. And then Yugoslavia collapsed, disintegrated into civil war. The Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia disintegrated into violent civil war in the early 1990s. And the European Union's response was the European Economic Community's response was to say, well, we need to be more active and more politically focused. Instead of just focusing on economics and business, we have to build upon our achievements of integrating our economic and business capabilities to be more politically active in the world and visibly politically active in the world. So we will create and rename the European Economic Community the European Union in the Maastricht Treaty, the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992, which then came into effect in 1993. And that's why we call this the European Union. And has the European Union been a superpower? It was criticized for not stopping the war in Yugoslavia. But at the same time, the United States couldn't win in Afghanistan. I should tell you what I wrote. I didn't tell you my statement. I said, I agree that the European Union will be recognized, say, in the future as the leader in vaccinating the world, because I predict, because the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was created in Germany. The Europeans do not have as much political pressure from individual member state nationalism to reserve doses of the vaccine for the individual member states. So like, for example, the American government under Joe Biden, Joe Biden and his administration may want to give more doses to Africa and poor countries of the world. But Joe Biden knows he will be attacked politically by his political opponents inside the United States, claiming that Joe Biden cares more about the well-being of the rest of the world and not enough about the well-being of Americans. That we should keep all of our vaccines until all of the Americans are vaccinated. Tedros Ghebreyesus, the World Health Organization director, criticized vaccine hoarding. Countries hoarding, keeping vaccine for themselves. That's nationalism. We can't be concerned about the well-being of everybody until we first take care of everybody in our own country before we care about everybody outside of our country. And that's the political pressure of nationalism. And Joe Biden wants to win elections next year for the US Congress elections for his party, the Democratic Party, and then he wants to run for re-election in 2024. So he's very sensitive to his political competitors in the American Republican Party, claiming that, oh, see, Joe Biden is sending out vaccines to the whole world, even though 50%, almost 50% of Americans are not vaccinated. Joe Biden doesn't care enough about America. I know it sounds silly, but that's nationalism. Nationalism is emotional. Nationalism is not, I don't want to use the term rational, but nationalism is about emotion and about loyalty to your nation over everybody else. European Union is not a nation. It's 27 countries. Each of them, most of them are nations. France is a nation state, Italy is a nation state, Germany is a nation state, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Spain. These are nation states. But the European Union is not a nation state. So the European Union is a little more insulated from individual nationalisms. So the European Union is sending out doses of vaccine without being, I mean, they can point to, look, we have so much vaccine, the Romanians can't use it all. And we'll keep producing vaccine. So that's my point here, right? That the Europeans do not have as much political pressure from member state nationalism to reserve doses of the vaccine for the individual member states. The European Union has adopted a European Union strategy for vaccine development and distribution that continues to be enforced. So they're buying and distributing the vaccine, but they're letting the member states decide how to individually decide how to give it to their people. It will continue to function and produce more vaccines that will be shipped to the rest of the world without political resistance. I mean, I'm not hearing people in France complaining that the Romanians, they might sell vaccines to South Korea. I'm not hearing anything about that, because they don't blame the European Union for that. They blame the Romanians, or they think it's not really relevant to France because the European Union has provided the doses that the French want. So that's my prediction. I think that as the months go by, you will see the European Union distribute more vaccines to more places than the United States. Because of nationalism, America is a nation state, the European Union is not a nation state. Ursula von der Leyen and the European Commission do not lead a nation state. They lead a confederation of countries. And so they're under less direct political pressure to engage in vaccine hoarding because the member states of the European Union think they have enough vaccines. They're not sacrificing vaccines by the AstraZeneca or the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna shipping out vaccines to Korea. I mean, did you see how Joe Biden justified giving that first batch of vaccines to South Korea from the United States? He gave it to the South Korean military, to the South Korean army, the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. And he could justify that, says, well, they're our ally. The South Korean soldiers are next to the American soldiers on the Korean Peninsula against the evil Kim Jong-un regime in North Korea. So we have to vaccinate our South Korean allies. And they sent it to the army because it was politically possible in the United States because of the constraints of nationalism. Say, well, we can, and the Americans didn't even want the Johnson & Johnson vaccine because there were some problems supposedly that people were worried about clotting, and it was developed late, and we had lots of Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines. So he sent over 1 million doses to South Korea, and they had to go not to you and you and you, to the South Korean military people. That's the impact of American nationalism on America's distribution of these vaccines outside of America to the other countries. Okay, so I mean, again, these politicians in the United States and in all the member states of the European Union, they think everything they do, they think about its impact on public opinion, about winning the next elections. And vaccine distribution appears to have been isolated from nationalist public opinion in the European Union, although there was some hostility to Britain because Britain was seen as not being cooperative in providing AstraZeneca vaccines. And then the Europeans under Angela Merkel said, well, we don't want the AstraZeneca vaccine anyway. Okay, so we have let's have another, I think I have another one here. Okay, so let me open up another file here. So, yeah. So what does it mean to be a superpower? And so let me, again, share screen. And so I sort of did this in a different route here. So I asked you the question, is or will the European Union become, quote, a superpower? And one of the ways, well, let me show you a complicated graph that you don't need to I won't do that yet. I'll do it later. What are the weaknesses of the European Union when you compare with the United States or China? One weakness is that it's a little more difficult to get people in the European Union to be willing to make sacrifices for European foreign policy. I mean, if I'm a typical American, or if I'm a typical Chinese, or a typical Russian, I can get excited when President George W. Bush says, we need to go invade Afghanistan to go find Osama bin Laden, who attacked us on September 11, 2001. And the American people, because they're nationalistic and America's a nation state, will go, not all, but the majority will go, yay, yeah, we will support our president in going to war against the terrorists who attacked us. It's much more difficult to mobilize people around European objectives in the same way as the Chinese can mobilize people around unifying with Taiwan, or the Americans attacking the terrorists who attacked America. So the issue is that the European Union has a problem in terms of mobilization base. It's not just how big your economy is in terms of its size and how technologically sophisticated it is, and even having your own currency. Can you motivate your people to make sacrifices to create a big army or a big navy or a big air force, and then send that big army, navy, or air force to invade and occupy another country? It's hard to imagine the European Union is ever going to invade and occupy anybody. And maybe that's a good thing, though, because it's really almost difficult, if not impossible, to do that unless you do it in certain ways. The Americans are in Iraq still and in Syria because they've allied with some groups of people against other groups in Iraq or other groups in Syria, who these people don't like each other. And so the Americans ally with one group locally to help them against another group locally. They did that in Yugoslavia as well. So Kosovo Albanians, they love America. There's a big American military base in Kosovo because the Kosovo Albanians believe that America is their ally against the Serbian oppressors who don't want Kosovo to be independent from Serbia. So there could still be an important role for military capabilities. But the European Union has been slow to develop those military capabilities. So what are the elements of power? When you say is the European Union super, what are the elements of power? Well, there's the resource base, and the European Union does really well in terms of resource base, right? It's got big capital and industrial capabilities. It's got educated, smart people, large population with high levels of education. They've got natural resources, high tech, right? And they've got internal market capacity, and they have big corporations that are influential around the world and listen to the Europeans when the Europeans ask them to do things in China or Russia. So we call those trans-state resources. Those in the past, those included colonies, but colonies are not so important today. But the Americans really rely upon their ability to control banks and other multinational corporations like oil companies and other industries to pressure them not to invest in Syria, or not to invest in North Korea or Iran. But then there are other elements of power as well, and that's mobilization base. And you could argue that this is the weakness of the European Union. People might feel European, but they generally feel much more strongly about being German first, and French first, and Polish first, and Italian first. European, yeah, but if I have to choose between Poland and Europe, I'll choose Poland. So you don't want people to be put in a situation where they have to choose between being Polish and being European. So this is mobilization based. So what a theorist of international relations, Hans Morgenthau, called national morale. The Chinese have high national morale. The Americans do. The Europeans as a group, maybe not so much. Maybe Germany does, maybe Poland does, but the European Union as an actor, as a power actor in international relations, it might be questionable about the extent to which China would really believe, or let's say Russia would really believe. Would the Europeans go to war if the Soviet Union annexed more of Ukraine, conquered more of Ukraine? They took Crimea, part of Ukraine. What if they took more? Would the Europeans fight? Questionable. So national morale is important, but at the same time, your enemies and opponents have high national morale, like the way the Afghan resistance had high national morale. Despite America's big advantage in resource base, they had an advantage in mobilization base. So we said at the beginning of class, at the beginning of last class, at the first meeting, that the European Union is a peace strategy. And the main challenge to peace in Europe is nationalism. And we saw that in World War II, right? That was a war of nationalism, vicious, stereotyping, hatred, genocidal atrocities, because how do nationalist actors act? Well, I'll tell you how nationalist actors act. What is nationalist behavior? How does a nation state like America or China or Germany in the 1930s or Italy under Mussolini act? Nation states like China, like the United States, like Japan, not like the European Union, not like the old Soviet Union. The Soviet Union, only half the population was Russian. The other 50% were Ukrainians, Latvians, Estonians, Georgians, Uzbeks, Kyrgyz, and so on. Nation states are more likely to stereotype and simplify the world in simplistic ways, collectively speaking, in terms of the dominant way of understanding the world in which a government adopts a foreign policy. And the best example of that is Hitler's Germany. They saw a world in very simplistic, stereotypical terms to make themselves believe that we can conquer the world. It's grossly wrong. But nation states are more prone to see threats and opportunities in stereotypical, highly simplified terms. So you can imagine, right? United States 20 years ago, people pointed out, hey, United States, I know you're angry about September 11, 2001 attacks, but you really want to invade Afghanistan? The Soviet Union was defeated there in 1980s. The British were defeated there in the 19th century. It's called the graveyard of empires. Why do you think, America, you can do in Afghanistan what the Soviet Union in the 1980s failed to do and what the British failed to do in the 19th century? And nationalists in America say, we're America. We can do anything. We won the Cold War. We are wonderful. We are so powerful. We have so much money, so much technology. That's nationalism. And they were wrong. Because stereotypes are wrong. But nation states are more prone. So when I say nationalism is a threat to peace in Europe, the European Union has to serve to prevent the governments of its members from engaging in stereotyping of each other. Poland versus Germany, France versus Germany, and so on. A greater likelihood exists that leaders of a nation state will advance seriously the option to expand state influence at the expense of other actors. And that includes the United States. You know, the United States was so proud of its victory in the Cold War, saving Korea and the whole world from the Russian version of Nazi Germany, and that it should be America's right and obligation to provide leadership to the whole world. And it's good for the whole world as well as good for America. 3, a greater tendency will exist among the publics of nation states to show a motivational preoccupation with the objective of ingathering community. So if there's part of your people living outside your country, you want that part of your people to be brought into your country. And of course, the best example today, one of the best examples, is the Chinese demand for Taiwan. That Taiwan was supposedly taken from China when China was weak and humiliated in their period of humiliation by the Europeans and later the Japanese. And we demand that Taiwan come back to the United Nation, United Chinese people. In Europe, you see that in Yugoslavia, to keep focused on Yugoslavia, how Serbia, when Yugoslavia was disintegrating, went to war with Croatia and Bosnia to unify the Serbian people outside of Serbia living in Croatia and Bosnia into Serbia by conquering parts of Croatia and Bosnia. That's called irredentism. In the European Union today, you don't hear much about irredentism because the European Union does a good job of counteracting nationalism. But there are issues. The Hungarians are not happy about the fact that there are millions of Hungarians who live in neighboring Romania. They want, many militant Hungarian nationalists want that part of Romania to be added to Hungary because they think it's Hungarian. But you don't hear about it because the European Union has squelched that. European Union has alleviated that, has removed it. You hear nothing about that in the Western press. And that's the point about the European Union, because we're coming to our closure here. The European Union doesn't get enough credit for its successes because its successes involve preventing bad things from happening. So when the European Union helps prevent Romania and Hungary from going into conflict over Transylvania in Hungary, that Romania claims that, I'm sorry, in Romania, that Hungary claims it should be part of Hungary, you don't hear about it because it's not happening. But why doesn't it happen? And European integration has to be part of any explanation as to why you don't hear more conflict between Hungary and Romania over Transylvania. We're learning more about that today because now that Brexit has happened, the concern that the violence in Northern Ireland might restart has occurred, because any explanation as to why the violence stopped in Northern Ireland in 1998, not completely, but mostly, in 1998 under the Good Friday Agreement that ended the violence in the Civil War, basically, in Northern Ireland, has to include European integration. It's not the only factor, but it's a critical factor explaining why peace came to Northern Ireland. And now we're all concerned because of Brexit, and Northern Ireland wants to stay, or the Catholics in Northern Ireland want to stay connected to the rest of the European Union and Ireland, which is still in the European Union. And the Protestant British nationalists, they want to be part of Brexit and as part of the United Kingdom. The people in nation states will display a greater concern with maintaining face and dignity. They want the government of their country to be respected and demonstrated to receive respect from other governments and other people around the world. You know, the European Commission doesn't have to deal so much with that. The public of a nation state will show a greater likelihood to be susceptible to grandeur interests, to conquer and defeat the others, to show that they are better than them. Again, the best example of that is Hitler's Germany. In order to enhance the power of the state, effective appeals by state leaders to the citizenry to make sacrifices may occur, and leaders of nation states will show greater effectiveness in their appeals to their people in this regard. So, as I mentioned earlier, the leaders of nation states can mobilize and get their people excited about doing foreign policy adventures, like conquering Afghanistan, or reuniting with Taiwan, or going to war with the Americans in Korea in 1953, or 1950 with China. These sacrifices include a willingness on the part of the military to become part of the armed forces. And that goes to the next point. The military will fight better for nation states compared to non-nation states. And this is our concluding point. The citizenry of a nation state will demonstrate a greater likelihood to grant state leaders a greater decisional latitude in defending state interests. So if George Bush says, we have to go to war in Afghanistan, the American people go, Afghanistan, where's Afghanistan? Go to war in Afghanistan! Even though they couldn't find Afghanistan on the map. But it's difficult to get out of the situation because you lose. You are defeated. You are humiliated. The country has been defeated. The nation's military has been defeated. We have been humiliated. Took 20 years for the Americans to get out of Afghanistan. And Donald Trump had to play a role to allow Joe Biden to build on that. Okay, that's where we'll stop today. Any questions? If not, then I will post these files on Cyber Campus, okay? So if no questions, I'll see you on Monday. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.